let's dive on into the quarterback position, starting with Matthew Stafford. Dropped in a lot of leagues, and deservedly so. Was under 15 fantasy points in every game so far this year until week 8, until he finally had a fully healthy, full passing attack with Cooper Kupp back, with Puka Nacua looking just like Puka Nacua of last year. What do the Rams do? They destroy the Vikings for 30 fantasy points. One of the best defenses in the league gets absolutely bombed by Stafford, who looked incredibly sharp. 279 yards, 4 touchdowns on the night. A top 3 quarterback in week 8. And I love it. And it's not like we haven't seen this before from Matthew Stafford. Remember last year even, first 8 games, he had only 8 passing touchdowns, was on a ton of waiver wires. He gets hurt. The bye week hits. Week 11, from that point on, 17 touchdowns across his next 7 games. He hadn't had a single top 12 game until week 12, and then 4 of his final 6 games were top 12 quarterback performances of over 20-plus fantasy points. He was the quarterback 6 with 20.8 fantasy points per game across that span. And again, it's not like he can't throw touchdowns. Just 2 seasons ago, the man was the quarterback 5 in fantasy with over 40 touchdowns on the year. So I do think there's a lot of upside here with Puka and Kupp finally back together, finally healthy. There are so many stats dating back to last year when they had both Puka, Kupp, and Kyren Williams in the lineup. There's only 5 games of that last year. They were a top 3 offense. They were top 3 in total EPA per play. I am so excited to see what this Rams team can do should they stay fully healthy from here on out. The only rub with Stafford is it is a tough schedule moving forward. Seattle, a great matchup this week, top 15 there. But then it is bottom half matchups all the rest of the season until week 17 with Arizona. You got Miami, New England, Philly, New Orleans, Buffalo, San Fran, and the Jets. None of those are great matchups. Only when you get to the playoff, the championship week, the Arizona Cardinals do get a good matchup. But I don't know that it necessarily matters for Stafford when they have all their weapons. And none of those defenses overly scare me on paper. In fact, you see a couple shootout matchups in there. So I like Matthew Stafford. He is my number 1 quarterback ad should he be out there in your leagues, a fringe QB1 in my rest of season rankings, which you can find over at rotostreetjournal.com. Moving forward is Jameis Winston, though, and who better to root for? Who's more fun than Jameis Winston? Leading a massive upset, 334 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions against the Ravens in one of the best performances I think we'll see all year of any quarterback here. 8.1 yards per attempt, 5 passes completed of over 20-plus yards. You love to see it. Jameis is out there back and slinging. A little more rain than last time we saw him with the Bucs as a full-time starter. He is not quite the slinging gunslinging Jameis of those years, but he did have 3 interceptions ultimately dropped on this year, but 4 on this week rather. 4 pass catchers did go for above 60-plus yards, and Kevin Stefanski has named Jameis the starter moving forward. He has averaged over 270 passing yards per game when he plays at least over 50% of the snaps. So we know Jameis Winston can definitely sustain a very, very hefty passing pie here with the Cleveland Browns. And just last year, Joe Flacco was the quarterback too as the starter from week 14 on when he took over. So there is some real upside. We know Ken Dorsey, the new OC, loves to sling it. We saw that on full display this past week. So Jameis, my second favorite quarterback ad of the week. He's neck and neck, though, and if you prefer to add Bo Nix, a little bit safer, more guaranteed to make it through the entire rest of the season. There's a world where Jameis comes out, throws 4 picks, and then we see DTR get unleashed the rest of the year. That's not going to happen to Bo Nix, who across his last 4 games, 3 of them have been for 20 or more PPR fantasy points, 29 points this last week out against the Carolina Panthers, 284 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, while also adding a touchdown on the ground for a 4-score massive fantasy point day for Bo Nix. Across these last 4 weeks, he is the quarterback 3 in all of fantasy football, and a lot of it, sure, he's doing okay as a thrower, 19th in success rate per dropback, 17th in EPA per throw. Okay, middling numbers, but what's really buoying him as a fantasy quarterback is the unexpected Konami code upside of Bo Nix. 550 rush yard and 8 rushing touchdown pace right now for Bo Nix. And you've heard the stats we've cited. Any QB that's hit 500 or more rushing yards. 15 of 16 have been top 12 quarterbacks. Well over half of them have been top 6. I don't expect that for Bo Nix. I don't think the passing upside is truly there, especially with these weapons. But real life-wise, too, you got to just give the guy some credit. Maybe the worst pass-catching core in the NFL besides possibly the Patriots at this point. And Bo Nix is making it work. 5-3. The team is kicking. I love what I'm seeing from the guy, especially in fantasy, now that he's running all over the place and a pretty soft schedule moving forward. Last quarterback to toss out there, though, is recently named starter Joe Flacco, another massive implication that's happening late here in the waiver wire cycle that you need to be ready to adjust to. And I don't think a lot of people will be talking about this Colts team, and not necessarily that Joe Flacco is a must-add, although he's averaging 274 pass yards per game so far this year, 2.5 touchdowns per game through his 2 starts, 66% completion rate, a 7-to-1 touchdown ratio. So for 7-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio for Joe Flacco compared to Anthony Richardson. He has not topped 50% completion rate in a single game. He has 4 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. He's averaged under 200 pass yards. It's abysmal. And I get it. Like, you got to let your guy develop. So I don't understand exactly what the Colts are doing unless they still think they have a shot to compete, which is why I don't want to go all in on Joe Flacco and his pass catchers, because ultimately when the Colts do get knocked out of playoff contention, I imagine they'll play it smart and see what they can develop with Anthony Richardson. But for the time being, again, Flacco was the quarterback 2 in fantasy points per game as a starter for the Browns. There is definite upside here for him, especially starting this week with the Vikings, a sneaky good spot for passing games. As we mentioned with Matthew Stafford, 4 touchdowns given up through the air. Last week, they're blitz heavy. They definitely are an opportunistic defense, which creates good fantasy success, but they have been one of the more generous pass defenses, giving up the most points to wide receivers, as we'll talk about in a little bit. So 4 really interesting, solid quarterback options for you on the waiver wire. If you're dealing with injuries, dealing with inconsistent play, you definitely have some options, and certainly for bye weeks if you need to fill in for Purdy coming up this week. What is up, you fantasy wolf? Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, share your thoughts in the comments, check out some more videos, and join the newest Wolfpack by subscribing below.